The idea that this is a win-win, mutually beneficial agreement is an absolute joke. It's quite clear that the EU is going to gain incredibly more than the African nations will, and that the gain by the EU will be at the expense of the living standards of people in those countries. And it is nothing more than a dressed-up, modern-day version of the colonialism that those countries used to embark in Africa. In the past, African governments could impose a tariff on the EU countries wanting to sell their goods. Now the EPA allows Europe to sell products in West African countries without having to pay anything, meaning simply that African countries can't compete. Meanwhile, of course, Europe can import freely all of the great things that Africa has to offer without paying any duty. The EU can take African raw materials, turn them into something else, and then sell them back at a cheaper price. And as a famous Ghanaian proverb goes, it is the fool whose own tomatoes are sold to him. And that is in reality what this is part of. The EPAs are based on indiscriminate trade liberalisation that refuses to take into account the special needs of a particular country's economy. This was something that was supposed to be provided for by the World Trade Organization. So the EU promised the WTO that it wouldn't force poorer countries to fully open up their markets and instead come up with this mechanism instead to the side. It is absolutely reprehensible to my mind. It lifts the limited protection for local markets. It means in scenarios that there will undoubtedly be losses for manufacturing. Trade trends would indicate that the growth in markets of Africa has been in other African countries for manufactured products. Instead, what we're likely to see now under this is that in West African countries, if they're to move away from primary commodity dependency and become a manufacturing hub, the African market is best for them. But those markets now are risk being taken over by the European Union. It's against the sovereignty of those nations. It's most definitely against their economic interests, and it will not benefit them in any regard. Meanwhile, the super profits of the companies that are determined to exploit them will be boosted.